326 BC. The Hyphasis River, Punjab. Alexander the Great has marched 8 years and 3,000 miles without losing a single battle. And now his soldiers are refusing to take another step. Ahead of him, the Nanda Empire. 6,000 war elephants. The most powerful army in Asia. What if he doesn't turn back? This is what the world looks like when he doesn't stop. By 326 BC, Alexander and his army had been marching for 8 years. They had destroyed the Persian Empire, the largest in human history. They had crossed deserts that killed armies. They had fought mountain guerrillas in Bactria for 3 brutal years. They had won every battle. They had already beaten war elephants. At the Hyphasis, 3 months before the mutiny, Alexander faced King Porus and his 85 trained elephants. The elephants panicked. The phalanx held. The soldiers knew how to fight elephants. What they didn't know was whether they could fight 6,000. That is what waited beyond the Hyphasis. Not a kingdom. An empire. The Nanda dynasty ruled the Ganges plain from Pataliputra, modern Patna in Bihar. Their army, 200,000 infantry, 80,000 cavalry, 8,000 chariots, and 6,000 war elephants. 5 times the size of any force Alexander had ever faced. Dhanananda was not beloved. Greek and Indian sources both describe him as brutal and unpopular with his own nobles. There were already internal fractures. A young tactician named Chandragupta Maurya was watching the Nanda court from the margins, learning its weaknesses. Alexander was marching toward an empire already cracking at the seams. To crack it open, he wouldn't just need a new tactic. He would need an alliance that would ultimately rewrite the next 2,000 years of human history. The point of divergence, on the evening of the mutiny, Alexander does not give his soldiers the choice to turn back. He gives them a speech. A promise. A lie, most likely, about how close the ocean is. He has done this before. The men follow. The campaign takes 2 years, not months. Alexander doesn't charge the Nanda heartland. He dismantles it piece by piece, flipping subordinate kingdoms resentful of Nanda taxation. He signs an agreement with Chandragupta, who in our timeline destroyed the Nanda Empire himself just 3 years later. Chandragupta provides local knowledge and interior supply lines. Alexander provides military training and a Macedonian officer corps. Each man is using the other, and both know it. By the time Alexander reaches Pataliputra, the Nanda coalition has already fractured. The 6,000 war elephants are real. But not all of them reach the battlefield. Regional defections, Chandragupta's pressure from the south, and the systematic destruction of Nanda supply lines mean the force Dhanananda can concentrate is perhaps a third of the theoretical maximum. It is still the largest battle of Alexander's career. The Macedonians adapt their Hyphasis tactics. Light javelin infantry harass the elephants' flanks. Specially designed sarissa formations with shortened spears at the front and burning pitch barrels on poles create fire corridors the elephants refuse to cross. The phalanx does not try to kill the elephants. It panics them, turning them back into the Nanda infantry behind them. The battle lasts 3 days. Dhanananda dies in the final assault on Pataliputra, reportedly killed by Chandragupta's forces who breach the city walls from the south while Alexander's phalanx holds the north gate. The Nanda Empire ends. But it does not become Alexander's empire. It becomes something neither man had planned. The war was over. But the true conquest, the one that would spark a scientific revolution centuries ahead of schedule, was just beginning. Alexander lives 6 more years in this timeline. Not because he is healthier, he is severely wounded at Pataliputra, but because he never returns to Babylon, where historically he contracted the fatal fever of 323 BC. He dies in Pataliputra in 317 BC, aged 39. Those 6 extra years matter enormously. Alexander had a habit, controversial with his Macedonian officers, of adopting the customs of conquered peoples. In Persia, he wore Persian robes. In India, he goes further. He requests an audience with the Buddhist Sangha. He meets with Brahmin philosophers, a meeting historical sources confirm actually happened during his Punjab campaign. He is genuinely curious. What the Indians have is a conception of mind that Greek philosophy hasn't developed, the Upanishadic tradition, early Buddhist analysis of consciousness. More sophisticated accounts of the inner life than anything in Plato or Aristotle. Alexander, who has spent 8 years watching men die for his ambition, finds this interesting in a way that is not merely political. His successors still fight over territory after his death. That is unavoidable. The generals carve. But in the East, the carving produces something different. The Indo-Macedonian satrapies are an order of magnitude larger than the small Greco-Bactrian kingdoms that emerged in our world. They hold the entire Ganges plain, with Chandragupta's administrative apparatus intact beneath them, and 60 years of deep cultural fusion before they fragment. What emerges is Greco-Buddhism, a real historical phenomenon, documented even in our timeline from the smaller Indo-Greek kingdoms that actually existed. In this timeline, it is not a regional curiosity. It is the philosophical foundation of the most powerful empire east of the Seleucid holdings. The first Buddha statues, depicted in human form rather than through symbolic objects, appear 2 centuries earlier, and they look like Apollo. Not as an insult to Buddhism. As evidence that 2 traditions found they were describing the same interior landscape in different vocabularies. Here is what Alexander's conquest of the Ganges plain does to world trade. In our timeline, the Silk Road developed slowly, over centuries, with enormous political and logistical friction. In this timeline, the Indo-Hellenic Confederacy is a continuous administrative zone from the eastern Mediterranean to the Bay of Bengal, shared language, standardized weights, legal contracts recognized at both ends. Trade doesn't just grow. It transforms in kind. More significant than the trade, Indian mathematics travels west. In our timeline, the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, 0, positional notation, the decimal, reaches Europe around 1200 AD through Arabic scholars, enabling the scientific revolution. In this timeline, that same mathematics travels the Indo-Hellenic trade route directly into the Greek philosophical world in 250 BC. Archimedes, who died in 212 BC in our timeline without positional notation, has it in this one. He is already the greatest mathematician alive. Give him a 0, and watch what he can do to a Roman siege engine, to a harbor's defensive artillery, to the structural calculations behind a 200-foot aqueduct. This isn't just a math win. It is a military and engineering superpower delivered 2,000 years early. The result is a proto-scientific revolution 2 centuries before the birth of Christ. Rome, when it rises, inherits not Greek philosophy preserved in libraries but a living, advancing scientific culture. Rome's engineering is now backed by mathematics that can calculate structural loads and design artillery with geometric precision. Rome does not fall in for 76 AD. Its eastern half, deeply integrated with the Indo-Hellenic world, never drops below the threshold of economic viability. The Industrial Revolution arrives in the 1400s, 300 years before Britain. And the world it builds looks like this. There was no Dark Ages. With a Rome that never fully collapsed, its eastern economic lifeline intact, the knowledge accumulated in the Hellenistic world compounded rather than shattered. The scientific revolution happened for centuries earlier, building on the Greek-Indian mathematical synthesis. The Industrial Revolution followed in the 1400s, not the 1700s. There was no transatlantic slave trade. The conditions that drove it, a European colonial project needing cheap plantation labor in depopulated territory, never materialized. The Americas were contacted by traders, not conquerors. The world in 2026 has a different center of gravity. The Indo-Hellenic corridor, stretching from the Aegean to the Bay of Bengal, is the civilizational spine around which the modern world organized itself. The world is roughly as technologically advanced as ours. The two world wars drove specific breakthroughs in electronics and aerospace, this timeline reached by different paths. They have not had a nuclear war. They also never needed one. What they have is a philosophical tradition richer than ours. The fusion of Greek rationalism and Indian consciousness studies, compounding over 23 centuries, produced a cognitive science far more advanced than ours. They understand the mind the way we understand genetics. Buddhism is not a minority religion in the West here. It is one of three co-equal civilizational philosophies: Hellenic rationalism, Buddhist consciousness, and an African philosophical tradition from an unconquered continent. There is no Christianity as we know it. Yeshua still lived and taught, but in a world where Greek and Indian ideas were already fused, his message joined a stream rather than becoming the stream. Alexander was 30 years old at the Hyphasis. He had conquered more territory than any human being in history, in 8 years. He was still the most brilliant military commander alive. And he turned back because his men were tired. The tragedy of Alexander is not that he died young. It is that he stopped young. The empire he actually built lasted, in coherent form, perhaps 40 years. The empire he might have built, tying the Mediterranean to the Ganges in a single cultural and administrative zone, would have lasted millennia. The difference between those two worlds is one mutiny. One river. One night where a 30-year-old man either crossed into the dark or didn't. What would you have done? I think about that more than I probably should. Until the vault opens again, subscribe to the Alternate Archive.